So as Joe mentioned, I am a facilitator for Bereaved Families of Ontario. I facilitate out of the Kitchener office. And that is, and I want to clarify, it is not a professional. I'm not a professional. I am a peer facilitator, so I'm on the same level as all the people that are in the group with me. For those of you that may not know, I'm a bereaved mom. I'm a grieving parent. So that is how I became to be a member of Bereaved Families of Ontario. And all our facilitators are also grieving family members in one way or another, whether a loss of a child or a parent or a family friend. They're all suffering the loss of a loved one. And when I'm talking today, I will offer you just a few insights into what we do as a facilitator, but I'm going to share with you first sort of the commonly employed theory. It's the theory of grief as adapted by our bereaved families, and it's the model of support. It's from Dr. William Worden, and it states 4 tasks of grieving. And these are to accept the reality of the loss, to face and work through the pain and the emotions of grief, to adjust to the environment without your loved one, and to withdraw your emotional energy from grieving and reinvest it in life and other relationships. And that's the most important one. We want to take our grief and turn it into something positive. So that by facilitating, that is something that I've been able to do. So as Joe mentioned, I am a wife and a mom and a grandma, and I'm really proud of my children. And what I want to share with you today is the story of our oldest son, Chris. So I'm a mom of 5, 2 daughters and 3 boys, and I want to share with you about our son, Chris, and the story that brought me to Bereaved Families. So I want to begin my talk by telling you a little bit about Chris. Most called him Chris. My husband and I called him Boo. And at the age of 22, he was a tall, handsome man. He was 6'5", and he measured right up to me and sat in the small of my back when we did. So he's the second of 5 kids, and he's a quiet observer, argumentative with, but warmly loved by his oldest sister, Nikki. And he was a best friend forever to his youngest sister, Vanessa. And he was adored by his 2 younger brothers, Jack and Bradley. So he affectionately referred to them as the 2 little ones in the family, even though they are now much, much bigger. He enjoyed sitting quietly on the back deck with his dad and I visiting and hashing out the day's events. And he had his ups and downs with us. Like many teenagers, we went through some rough and rocky roads, but at the end of the day, he was certainly loved. So as a young boy, he played sports in Teeswater. He did hockey and baseball. He tried Cub Scouts, which he really enjoyed. And then he found his passion, which was cars, guitars, and girls. So that was lots of fun for him and many boys his age. He had a small but loyal group of friends. And when he wasn't with them, he would often be found in his room playing his guitar or playing some video games, just quietly keeping to himself. Chris's biological father, so just to preface this, my husband I'm remarried for 25 years, but Chris's father left us when he was 3. And when Chris was 6, I remarried, and my husband became the father that my children were lacking. So I was very fortunate in that he stepped into a role that not many young men would, and he raised those kids as his own. When Chris was about 15, he went through a bit of a tough time, struggled with being bullied at school, got into some drugs that we weren't too pleased with, and Sean and I argued with him about this a lot. It wasn't something that we wanted in the home or that we wanted for our younger kids to see or experience. And so at that point, he opted to move to Cambridge to live with his dad. So I was devastated, thinking, where has I failed as a parent? But in hindsight, I realized it was one of the best things I had done, was giving him the opportunity to go down to Cambridge and live with his dad. And I did thank Andrew because he accepted the role as a parent very willingly. And for a year, Chris lived in Cambridge and really came into his own. And I remember a conversation, one of the first weekends that he had come up after he had moved in with his dad, and he said, "Oh, I've been here and there, and I've traveled to this place, and everywhere in Cambridge." And I thought to him, I said, "How are you getting to all these places? Because I'm certain your father's not driving you." He said, "Mom, he bought me a bus pass and said, figure it out." So I was pretty happy that he had some sense of independence, and I credited his dad to that. So skip ahead a couple years, Chris had moved back home with us, and he finished his grade 12 through the cooperative education at FE Medill, and he had really started to come into his own. He was working and had bought a car and was really moving forward in his life, and he decided to venture back to Cambridge, and he was going to apprentice to be a mechanic under his dad. So that was a really great opportunity for him, and we were so pleased. And for a few weeks, because it was really just a few short weeks, he enjoyed life, and he was doing the things that he wanted to do. And that's the most important thing for me to remember. He was doing what he wanted to do. So then we segue into October of 2010. So my son had gone out with some friends that night. They thought they'd, like every 22-year-old, will head to the bar for the evening. And he decided not to take his car so he wouldn't be drinking and driving, which every parent is pleased to hear. And at 1 o'clock that night, or that morning rather, Chris left the bar with his friends and they started walking home. And when he got to his friend's place, he hopped on his bike and said, "I'm just taking off. I'll see you in the morning. I'm heading to Bannisters," and off he went. And at 1:20 in the morning, my son was hit by a train and obviously did not survive. So as from what the police have told us and the coroner and from learning from the train conductor, we're speculating my son came onto the tracks, he trespassed where he should not have been, and he came across the tracks and hit the train track and fell off his bike, hitting his head. And the speculation is that he was rendered unconscious, and at 1:20 the train had come along and it tried very unsuccessfully to notify him, to notify someone in the house, like in their little station house, that there was something. The first thing they saw was a bike on the tracks, and as they got closer, they saw a body. And they did try to notify, but to no avail. And the resulting was a train pedestrian accident. So I was working that day at the retirement home, so I'm just going to give you a little background on how I heard. I had worked my evening shift, and it segued into me doing a night shift, as one of the ladies had called in, and I was the nurse on, so I wasn't able to leave. So I worked my evening, I worked my night, and I came home that morning at about 20 after 7, and I saw a message on the machine blinking, and I thought, whoa, who would be calling me? So I listened, and it was his dad, and he said, "You need to call me. Call me in Cambridge." So I picked up the phone and I gave him a call, and he said there'd been an accident. And I thought to myself, and I said out loud, because most people are very positive, or I try to be, and I said, "Oh, but Chris is okay, right? Like, he's fine." And then there were 4 words that changed my life. "Nope, Chris is dead." And with that, my world was shattered. And I just didn't even know what to do. I ran to my neighbors to get help. My family circled around me, and in those brief moments of clarity, I was able to rhyme off phone numbers to get a hold of our children. For our oldest daughter lives in Sweden, and our youngest daughter was living in Toronto at the time. So it was a real struggle for me to get a hold of them. Family members stepped in for me, and it was about an hour and a half before they were able to get to my husband and get him home to me. So that first 2 hours was just a blur, and I was dealing with this news. Really felt like I was dealing with it by myself, but I did have my whole family there. So we spent the next several days just processing the news and traveling back and forth to Cambridge to make arrangements. We had 2 funerals for Chris. We did one in Cambridge to satisfy the family down there. And it was a lovely service. And then we had a memorial up in Teeswater, and it was a grand affair, might I say. It was very fitting and becoming, and the community rallied around us like we'd never seen before. And so for each of our children, they've grieved differently. Our oldest daughter, being away, has had to do her grieving on her own. And she's had a lot of trouble coming to terms with Chris's death because they were more like oil and water. So it was a little bit harder for her to accept it. And even to this day, she does struggle to have to talk about it. And she loves talking about her brother and reminiscing, but in terms of the loss, that's a tough one for her. Our youngest daughter, she chooses to celebrate Chris. So at every opportunity, every holiday, every birthday, every meaningful moment in her life, she's celebrating her brother, whether it be through making a cake for his birthday. And her 2 sons know all about their Uncle Chris. They'll tell you he's really, really tall, he's really funny, he's smelly. They'll tell you all sorts of good things about your uncle if you'll just listen. But they will also tell you that Chris trespassed, and now my grandma doesn't have him. So they will share with you. They're very open and honest, and that's through the eyes of a child. Our 2 youngest sons, they keep pictures by their bed of their brother. They're more quiet. Our youngest is especially quiet. He does not like to talk about it. He does not like to reminisce about his brother. But what he does like to do is keep Chris's shirt under his pillow, and he is now 19, and that shirt still sits there. And in his moments, I know that he does quiet reflection on his brother and mourns the loss and forever will. Our middle son, Jack, is a little more open about it. He's bubbly and bouncy, and he'll talk about Chris, and he keeps Chris's guitar hanging in his room, and you can often hear him strumming it, which brings joy to me. So for my husband and I, we grieved differently. Sean's very quiet, strong, determined man. I, on the other hand, was more emotional. I was the typical wrapped in a blanket, couldn't hardly catch my breath, but relied heavily on him for that support that I was needing. So when we talk about Chris's accident, we talk that it was certainly preventable. This was something that, as a result of his poor choice in trespassing across these tracks, cost us our son. So what my daughter and I have done, we've joined with Operation Lifesavers. And this is a not-for-profit group that does train safety. And I'll just put a little plug in for them. The week of September 29th is Train Safety Week. And my daughter and I have just recently filmed a vignette for them on train safety, a public service announcement. So that'll be coming out. It's usually done through social media. And they have a whole week of activities, and you go into schools and you present. That isn't something my daughter and I are doing. We're just in the vignette. There were 6 families chosen, 3 from Canada and 3 from the States. And we were, I say, one of the lucky ones to be chosen to get our story out and our message out to those. And I say if even one family hears our story, hears the message, then that's one person that perhaps you've saved, right? So I always say, when we lost Chris, I didn't know how I would put one foot ahead of the other. And I was fortunate enough to come across Bereaved Families of Ontario. And that's the group that I'm affiliated with now. And I was fortunate to go into one of their support groups as a grieving parent. And they're closed groups, so there was 8 of us in the group. And they offer you the support and the understanding that how you're grieving is absolutely perfect. And what I say is I'm not a professional. I'm not an authority on grief. What I'm an authority on is my own grief. So how I grieve is just perfect for me. And how you grieve is going to be just perfect for you. It's all in the individual and how your journey is meant to be taken. So this has given me the opportunity through Bereaved Families to support other grieving families. And again, it's just that giving back to the community and giving back to people that have given to me. So I facilitate these closed groups, and the groups usually 6 to 8 parents in them. They're about 8 weeks in length, and it's a very intense yet fulfilling time, and we go through many different facets. There's a different section each week that we go through, a different layer of grief that we talk about. And of course, there is the sharing of the story of our children before and after our loss as well, which is important for we as facilitators to hear, but also for other individuals in the group to hear as well. Bereaved Families also offers a variety of other groups as well, and I do have some pamphlets on it here. They do a peer support group for any adult that has lost any loved one, so whether it be husband, wife, child, parent, friend. It's called Living with Loss, and I do have some brochures out at the check-in desk. I also have some up here for that. We offer an infant loss group as well for those that have suffered the loss of a child 3 years and under. And then there's Healing Little Hearts. So that's a group for children that have suffered a loss, that they can come in on their own terms and their own level and talk about the loss that they're feeling right now, whether it be a parent, a sibling, a grandparent. It's there to help them cope as well. So during these group discussions, we talk in detail about the 5 stages of grief. So we've got denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these 5 stages come in no particular order. You can sit in denial for a long time, and you can bump to anger for a while, and then you can go back to denial, or you can go down to bargaining. There's no, this is how you do it. It's very unique and individual, and you may find yourself repeating a stage. You may find you skip a stage. It's really the journey that you take is your journey. So in your packages, I've brought a few things just from Bereaved Families. You're welcome to browse through them. I just wanted to briefly touch on the signs and symptoms of grief because there are some very physical signs to it. And I can tell you when someone said, my heart is breaking, my heart is literally breaking. There is a physical pain. When my husband arrived home, I said to him, my God, I'm having a heart attack on top of all this. I think I'm having a heart attack. And when I went to the doctor, she said, no, that's your heart breaking. So there is a real physical pain. No matter the loss, there is a physical pain, because I have suffered more than one loss. My husband, I'm just going to give you a little brief blurb. We lost our son in 2010. And then in 2012, I lost my grandma, who I was nursing. And my cousin is here today. She was our dear, dear grandma. We went every other night to put her to bed, and we learned a lot of lessons at the foot of her bed. So I suffered a big loss when my grandma passed away. And then a few short months later, I lost my best friend. And my husband and I have also lost aunts and uncles on both sides. And then we have lost 2 of our nephews as well. So one in an accident and one to suicide. So we've suffered a lot of loss. And that's the thing with the symptoms of grief and the stages of grief. Just when you think you're almost at the top of the hill, something might bump you back down. And it can be as the loss of a neighbor, the loss of a family friend. It can be a loss of a grandparent. It can bump you back down. So on the signs and symptoms sheet, just briefly, some of them that I went through was the exhaustion. I really didn't want to eat. As you can see, the weight gain was the one I took on. And then there's also weight loss, depression, headaches. There's all sorts of physical signs. And your emotional signs, you're denying the guilt. The guilt over the loss is huge. What could I have done differently? How could I have helped him? What should I have done? I should have talked about trains. I should have never let him move to the city. You have all these things you think, but there's nothing at the end of the day you could have done that would have changed the scenario. Your spiritual effects. For those that may be spiritual in their thoughts, you can go one of 2 ways. You can either pull away and blame God, or you can pull God in and say, oh, I know there's a reason and a time and a purpose for everything, and I just have to wait for you to show me what it is. And on that day when Chris died, there is something I want to share with you. I was at my parents' farm. We congregate at the home farm all the time, and I was so grateful we did, because it's 100 acres. And people came and went all day. I couldn't even tell you who was there. But what I did was I put on an old blanket that my great-grandma had made, and I paced my dad's hayfield the whole day. I just walked that hayfield, and I kept thinking, why is this happening? Why have you done this to me? Why? And I remembered back as a little girl to my grandparents' home, and on the wall there hung a little plaque, and it said, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only son." And I thought, oh, well, he knows how I'm feeling. He lost his son, so if he can do this, I can do this. And I found some peace and comfort in that. So whether you're spiritual or not, I did find comfort in the fact that he truly knew what I was feeling. So something else I want to bring too is with a loss of, and especially a loss of a child, it can tear a family apart. So again, one of 2 things: you're either pulled apart, or it either pulls you back together. And for my husband and I, we were so fortunate that it pulled us even tighter. I can tell you, I loved him from the moment I met him, but I have such a deep, deep love and respect for him now, because it has pulled me so much closer to him. I would not have gotten through all that I've been through if it weren't for him. And just his love for the kids. I often say to him, we were high school sweethearts. I should tell you the little story. Should I tell them the story? Oh my God, you'll love this. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic, Deborah, but this is a good story. So I met my husband in high school. We were high school sweethearts, and we were engaged to be married. And about 6 months before the wedding, we had this little kerfluffle over the, oh geez, I hope I don't offend anybody, Catholic Church and Protestant Church. So his family was clearly Catholic, and my mom was purely Protestant. And where do you get married, right? So we're going back 30-some years. And we had a big fight over it. And he said, fine, we're not getting married. I said, fine, let's not. So off we went our separate ways. We broke up. And I went off. I went to the city, became, like I was a nurse. I went down there and worked. I met a man, got married, had a rough, ridiculous marriage, got divorced. These girls know me, so they can attest to it. And I apologize for being off topic, but we segue back 5 years, and I moved back up to Teeswater, had bought a home, and my brother said, oh, you should give Sean a call. I was like, oh, please, I have 3 kids. He's like, no, I think you should call him. So I called him. So our little story is I called him on a Sunday, and he came on a Wednesday, and he's been there ever since, and he's been here 28 years. So, but I thank God every day, and I thank him every day. I tell him every day how grateful I am for him, and he tells me the same. And when we lost Chris, he grieved like no other, and truly, it has pulled us closer together. When you go through something like this, it is the foundation that's going to help to pull you through. So I just, touching on the last thing for signs and symptoms, I'll bump back to my original topic, the social effects, withdrawal, isolation. I did all those things. I withdrew from my family. I withdrew from my friends. I didn't even answer the telephone if it rang. I was like, please don't make me get up for that phone. And just your energy is just depleted. You're exhausted all the time. And there's no timeline. I have days when I'm still exhausted and I think, oh, what have I done today? And then I remember, that's right, I lost my son. That's why I'm exhausted today. So there's days that are better than others. And what I can tell you is this. I had a lovely, lovely patient when I went back to work after being off for several weeks who said to me, you've lost a son. And I said, yes, I did. And she said, well, I'm going to tell you, it never gets easier. But what you're going to learn to do is tolerate it. And that's just what we've done. We learn to tolerate it. We go each day at our own pace and our own time. And I've learned to not worry what other people are thinking. I've learned to not worry if they're judging me or feeling that I should be moving on or moving forward. I've learned to accept that this is what I'm going to do and how I do it. If I keep his pictures up and I throw him a birthday party every year, I put his stocking out at Christmas, that's for me to do because that makes me feel good. The other thing I want to talk about too is this picturing grief. And some of this stuff, this is from The Courageous Journey by Sandy Kaplan and Gordon Lang. And it just touches on about imagery and how using imagery can help you through your grief. Picturing it like a jigsaw puzzle where it's little pieces and you're trying to connect those pieces back together. They don't always fit back in that nice orderly fashion we once had. So for me, my picture puzzle always misses one piece because that one piece will always be gone now. So for family functions, I always have an empty chair at the table. At my parents' when we're all together, there's always one person that's never going to be able to join us again. So my jigsaw puzzle is never, probably ever, won't be complete because that's one piece is missing. And again, you can run through these. I have them in your handouts, but grief is like a wound. So we get cut open with a wound and it takes a while to heal. Sometimes that wound breaks open again. You may re-injure it. Well, that's how grief is. You've got a wound now. It heals over ever so slightly and then opens again. And just when you think it's just about closed, you get a little trigger again. And it could be a favorite song on the radio. It could be maybe you found a penny on the floor. Maybe you breezed through a box of stuff and you came across a couple of their pictures. So it does, sometimes that wound is opened wide and sometimes it's almost closed tightly. They talk about grief coming in waves, so waves pounding across the shore. And they do. Grief comes in waves. So initially the waves are hitting you fast and hard. Every single day the waves are hitting you, and then the waves gradually start to roll a little softer and they're not hitting you as hard, and you just navigate your way through that ocean. And trying to paddle and stay afloat is what I say. I'm just trying to stay afloat today. Some days I'm right afloat, and some days I'm like pretty near dog paddling my way to the shore. But I make it. And then it's like a maze. So blind alleys, you never know which way you're going to turn. If you've ever been in a maze and you've got to work your way through it, that's much like grief. It's working your way through things and just accepting that sometimes you're going to hit a wall and you're going to be stuck at that wall until you can back up and work your way around the next corner. I talked a little bit about the holidays. I said oftentimes for anyone that's grieving the loss of a loved one, whether it's a husband, wife, daughter, son, grandparent, the holidays and coming up to those holidays or the anniversary of their loss, for me it's the anniversary of Chris's accident, it's the days before that are really intense for me, even for his birthday. It's very intense for me because it's the build up to that holiday, the build up to that anniversary. And I have to think to myself, how am I going to get through this? And I'm often more anxious and I will pace and I will be moody and just work my way through it. They see it at work. I'm very quiet when I'm at work, believe it or not. I'm quiet when I'm there, girls. These ladies know me, so they know. But I just find I have just certain coping methods to get through it. So it's often the build up to it, and then when you get to the day, it turns out to be quite lovely. And so I know initially when we were having these birthday parties for Chris, I know there were family and friends that thought, oh, for heaven's sakes, what is she doing to her kids? But they love it. Every year we have his favorite cake, which is ice cream cake, slightly melted, because that's how we roll. And we have his favorite meal, which is chicken a la king. And even if you don't like it, you eat it because it's put before you on the table. And then we celebrate the end of the day with just a good, strong whiskey toast, because that's what he liked, was a good whiskey toast. And it's only for our children and my husband. I don't invite the neighbors. I don't invite the town. I just do it quietly for my husband, and our kids. And I have to say, my son-in-law, he married my second daughter. He came into it after Chris had passed away, and he has been most gracious. I feel like when he talks about him and how he reacts to us and is around us, that he's known Chris all his life as well. So one May 22nd, because that's Chris's birthday, we were surprised. We came home from work and James had been there, and he had baked a cake with our grandson, and he had candles in the shape of a heart and Chris's picture and a bottle of whiskey on the table, and he was all set. So it was really, really touching, because he knew I wasn't going to maybe have time to do it, but he had thought ahead to do that for me. And when it comes time for the anniversary of his death, it's Thanksgiving weekend. So I really don't like to celebrate Thanksgiving the same manner. My family always got together out at the home farm and we had a great big celebration, but I find that really difficult. So what my husband and kids and I have done is we've changed it up. We take off for the weekend and we go to Whitby and we go apple picking, and we make apple crisp and pies down at my brother-in-law's, and we just change up how we do the weekend, but we always finish the weekend with a good whiskey toast just to remember him by. And then with Christmas coming and caught up in the season, it's become a little bit easier to manage. But what I do is every year I put his stocking out, and I'm the only one that does this. I write a letter and I put it in there. I always tell the kids they're welcome to. I tell my husband, you're welcome to do something, but I'm the only one that writes a letter. And then if you choose to go and read it, you can pick them up. So for the last 8 years, I've written a letter to Chris every Christmas Eve, just telling him, sometimes it's on a Post-it note, sometimes it's a 3-page letter, sometimes it's just a sticky note, I love you. But it's something that I do for him. And then I always do something in the community in honor of him. I give back through the food bank. We might buy a skid of food. This year we did donations to the town hall in memory of him. It's something that we can do to honor him, and we do it quietly and thoughtfully, and it's just a way for us to get through our grief and get through the holidays, really. And I have to say, the arrival of our 2 grandchildren has been a real uplifting moment for us. I think there's a piece of our heart that will always be lost, but that moment you receive the gift of a grandchild and holding them, you could feel that peace just filling with love, and it was an instant joy. I sobbed and sobbed, and I thought to myself how wonderful this was to feel this happy again, and I hadn't felt that way for some time. So the last thing I want to share with you today, I'm going to read to you just a bereavement guidelines for the loss of a loved one. And this is something that we go through in our bereaved family groups. We talk to the group about it. And so I'm just going to read it to you, and that will close off my presentation. So bereavement guidelines for the loss of a loved one. If you think you're going insane, that's normal. If all you can do is cry, that's normal. If you have trouble with the minor decisions, well, that's normal. If you can't taste your food or have any semblance of appetite, that's normal too. If you have feelings of rage, denial, and depression, rest assured that's normal. If you find yourself enjoying a funny moment and immediately feeling guilty, that's normal. If your friends dwindle away and you feel like you have the plague, that's normal. If your blood boils and your hair curls when someone tells you it was God's will, I'm getting goosebumps on that one, that's normal. If you can't talk about it, but you can smash dishes, shred phone books, and kick the garbage can down the lane, that's normal. If you can share your story and your feelings with an understanding listener, that's a beginning. If you can get a glimmer of your loved one's life rather than their death, that's wonderful. If you can remember your loved one with a smile, that's healing. And if you find your mirrors have become windows and you're able to reach out to other bereaved individuals, that's growing. Thank you.